Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are tackling a huge question, one that comes up all the time in North America. What's the real value of a job in Canada versus a job in the USA? We're going to dive deep, way beyond just the salary numbers you see in a job offer. We're talking total compensation, costs, quality of life, the whole picture.
Exactly. And the conventional wisdom has always leaned towards the
Oh,
U.S.
absolutely. That's where you hear about the seven-figure bonuses, the
Yeah.
Silicon Valley money.
Right. But we're seeing a big shift in how people feel about that.
We are. There was this viral Reddit thread. I think it had over 4,500 upvotes. And it was full of Canadian professionals basically asking, are our salaries fundamentally broken? Can we even keep up with the cost of living anymore?
And that kind of question, when so many people are asking it, tells you the old assumptions really need a second look.
So that's our mission here today.
Yeah, we're going to stop just looking at the raw income and really analyze two things. First, the total cost of employment, all those hidden out-of-pocket costs. And second, the overall quality of life that you actually get.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's start with the hard numbers, the salary figures,
Yeah.
and see where the competition really lies.
So if you just look at a simple table of gross salaries, converting everything to US dollars, the US advantage is pretty clear in most professional fields.
Like what?
Well, a senior software developer in the US is probably pulling in about 25% more than their Canadian counterpart. A registered nurse, that's a 13% bump. A marketing manager, maybe an 18% premium south of the border.
So no surprise there. The U.S. is still the leader in those big corporate and tech roles. But the sources we looked at showed that Canada isn't, completely out of the running.
Not at all. There are some really key areas where Canada actually pays better. Think public sector, certain skilled trades.
Right.
A public school teacher in Canada, for instance, makes on average 23% more than in the US. An electrician can earn about 5% more.
And those are roles that are heavily tied to what? Public spending and union strength.
Exactly. And that completely changes the dynamic.
That's a huge difference right away. But of course, those raw numbers, they don't exist in a bubble. You have to balance them against the cost of living.
And this is where the picture starts to get, well, a lot more complicated. The US does have an edge on consumer goods.
Like groceries, electronics.
Yeah, groceries, electronics, clothes, all that stuff is generally 15 to 20% cheaper. So that helps the US salary go further until you hit what we're calling the big equalizer.
Housing.
Exactly. Housing just flips the entire script, especially in the big cities where those high salaries are concentrated.
Let's use the most dramatic example from the sources. We're talking Toronto versus New York City.
Right. So when you factor in everything, all consumer goods plus rent, New York City's cost of living is almost 80% higher than Toronto's.
80%? That's massive.
It is. And if you just isolate housing, a one-bedroom apartment in the city center is a staggering 131.5% more expensive in New York.
Wait, so your salary might be higher in the U.S., but your rent is more than double. The local purchasing power has to be just crushed.
That is the single most critical insight. Despite the higher gross wage, our analysis showed that local purchasing power is actually 6.5% lower in New York compared to Toronto.
So you might see a bigger number on your paycheck, but it buys you less actual life.
That higher paycheck gets completely eaten by your rent.
That is just so stark for the big elite cities. But I thought the comparison outside the main hubs was maybe even more telling. We always hear about the housing crisis in Vancouver and Toronto.
And it's real when you measure affordability as a ratio of home price to income. So how many years of salary it takes to buy a home, those cities are terrible. Vancouver is 13.2 times income. Toronto is 11.8.
Wow. So a median home in Vancouver costs over 13 years of the median salary. That really puts it in perspective.
It does. But then you look at a secondary Canadian city like Calgary, that ratio drops, and it drops dramatically to just 4.1 times.
And how does that stack up against comparable U.S. cities?
That's the real opportunity. Calgary's 4.1 ratio is way better than major U.S. hubs that aren't on the coasts. Austin, Texas is 5.2. Seattle is 7.1.
So the path to home ownership for the middle class is actually much clearer in many parts of Canada.
Vastly. It's a huge long-term financial advantage.
Okay, that's a perfect transition.
Yeah.
Let's move to the things that are not on the paycheck but have, immense financial weight. The Canadian Advantage categories. This is where it gets really interesting because we're talking about money you don't have to spend.
And we have to start with the biggest one, healthcare. The U.S. private system is just a massive, massive expense.
Okay, break down the numbers for us.
For an American worker, the average annual premium, just the premium, is $6,220 for one person. For a family, it jumps to $17,400.
So that's before you've even used it, right?
Yeah.
That's just to have the insurance.
Exactly. And that's before you factor in the average deductible, which is another, what, I think $650 for an individual.
So you're talking about a potential annual cost for a family that could easily top $25,800.
Easily.
So before that family in the U.S. even buys their first coffee of the year, they've already effectively lost the equivalent of a mid-sized car payment compared to their Canadian counterpart.
Absolutely. That is money that has to come out of that higher U.S. salary. In Canada, the direct cost for public medical care to the employee is zero. It's tax funded.
And what does that translate to in earning power?
Well, when you calculate that savings as an effective salary boost, the Canadian worker is getting an extra $6,000 to $17,000 a year. That closes the salary gap really, really fast.
Okay, beyond just the money, let's talk about time, peace of mind. The sources point to a huge gap in work-life balance and guaranteed time off.
And the contrast here is it's purely regulatory. The U.S. federal government requires 0 days of paid vacation.
Zero.
Zero. And 0 paid holidays. Most U.S. workers get around 16 paid days off a year, but that's entirely up to the employer.
And in Canada?
In Canada, federal law mandates it. You get a minimum of 2 weeks vacation after your first year, 3 weeks after 5 years, plus another 11 to 13 statutory holidays.
So the average Canadian is getting 23 paid days off. That's a full week more than in the U.S., and it's guaranteed. What does that extra week do for things like, burnout and job satisfaction?
It creates a baseline of security. You know you can rely on that time. But if we're talking about real game changers for families, we have to talk about parental leave. This is where Canada just completely dominates.
Okay, so lay out the Canadian system.
Canada offers between 12 and 18 months of paid leave. The standard model is 35 weeks at 55% of your salary, paid through employment insurance. It's a robust public safety net.
And what's the American federal standard again?
12 weeks, unpaid. And that's only if you qualify under the Family and Medical Leave Act. Only about a quarter of U.S. workers have access to any kind of paid family leave.
The economic difference there is it's astonishing.
It is. If you quantify it, a Canadian family with 2 kids will receive somewhere between $35,000 and $50,000 more in parental leave benefits over their careers.
But it's not just the money, is it?
No, it's about stability. It removes that financial pressure that forces parents, often women, to delay their careers or leave the workforce entirely. It preserves long-term earning power.
That really puts that higher U.S. salary into a much different light. Okay, let's look at the career landscape itself. Long-term stability, job security. How easy is it to get laid off?
Well, Canada has much stronger protections against wrongful dismissal, and there are mandated notice periods, anywhere from 2 to 8 weeks, depending on how long you've worked there. Severance is also often required.
And in the U.S.?
Most states are employment at will.
Meaning you can be fired at any time for almost any reason.
Instantly, with no required notice or severance. It's a fundamental philosophical difference in how the system values a worker.
Speaking of opportunity, let's talk about the innovation gap. Because the U.S. is the undisputed global tech center. I mean, the venture capital numbers are just breathtaking, $130 billion in the U.S. versus just $6 billion in Canada.
Yeah.
Doesn't that just mean Canada will always be a follower in tech, no matter how good the social safety net is?
That capital gap is real. You can't deny it. But it doesn't mean Canada is out of the game. It just focuses its strengths. Montreal is a world-class AI research hub. The Waterloo region is a very robust tech ecosystem.
And how do they fuel those ecosystems?
The real strength is how Canada attracts global talent. The immigration process is incredibly streamlined for skilled workers.
And the rise of remote work has to be a huge factor here now.
It's completely changing the calculus. It's basically wage arbitrage on a national scale. The data shows this massive trend. 34% of Canadian professionals now say they work remotely for a U.S. company.
So they're earning U.S. salaries.
But keeping their Canadian healthcare and paid leave benefits. And because the Canadian dollar is usually lower, it's actually cost-effective for the U.S. employer. It's the best of both worlds for the Canadian worker.
Which leads directly to the ultimate stability question. Immigration and the path to actually becoming a permanent resident, or PR.
The U.S. system is it's complex, it's unpredictable. The main route for skilled workers, the H-1B visa, is a lottery.
So it's not just about merit, it's luck.
A huge part of it is luck. And the processing times can take anywhere from 2 to 15 years, or even longer. Canada, on the other hand, has a clear, points-based express entry system.
Based on skills, education, language.
Right. And it's predictable. Applications are usually processed in 6 to 12 months.
And for students who come to Canada, that post-graduation work permit, the PGWP, it seems like it's designed to be a bridge to residency.
It is the main bridge. Almost 3/4 of all PGWP holders become permanent residents within 5 years. The system is set up to actively convert that temporary talent into permanent residents and taxpayers. It's a strategic advantage the U.S. just doesn't have.
Okay, let's pivot now and look at the financial barriers that exist just to get to that level of earning power. We have to talk about education costs, especially for international and undocumented students.
Yeah, tuition is a huge dividing line. For international students, the U.S. is just significantly more expensive across the board. You're looking at what, $25,000 to over $50,000 USD for undergrad?
And in Canada.
It's more like $20,000 to $36,000 Canadian.
But we should be clear, that gap is widening inside Canada too. Universities are really relying on international student fees.
Oh, massively. The sources show that by 2025, international undergrads are expected to pay 5 times what Canadian students pay. That's up from 3.6 times just a decade ago. Ontario is the most expensive, nearly $50,000 Canadian for an international undergrad.
So post-secondary education is basically an export product now.
It really is.
That financial hurdle is high. But let's talk about an even higher wall. The legal barriers for undocumented students in the United States, this is a whole different category.
It's a profound lockout. There was a Supreme Court ruling, Plyler v. Doe, back in 1982, and it guaranteed undocumented kids free K-12 education.
So the Supreme Court says you get a high school diploma, but what happens the day after you graduate?
The federal government slams the financial door to college shut. Because of federal law, these students are ineligible for any federal financial aid. Specifically, things like the federal Pell Grant, which is thousands of dollars.
So unless their family can pay full price out of pocket, the dream of a degree is pretty much over.
It's almost unattainable for most.
Are there any states that try to fix this?
There's a patchwork. Only about 20 states let eligible undocumented students pay the cheaper in-state tuition, and only 5 of those let them get state financial aid. Texas is a good example, offering some tuition discounts and a state grant.
But even if a student gets through all of that, gets the grants, gets the degree, there's one final brutal barrier waiting for them.
The work permit. Without legal authorization to work, like DACA, which itself is highly conditional and always under threat, that college degree can be practically useless for getting a job in their field. They have the education, but they can't legally enter the workforce.
So after all this, what does it all mean? If you're listening to this, the comparison is obviously not simple. The U.S., it seems, still offers the path for maximizing your short-term income.
For sure. If you're in senior tech, finance, a highly specialized medical field, that's the high-risk, high-reward option. Canada consistently offers superior total value, better long-term stability, better quality of life. When you factor in the zero direct cost for healthcare, the generous paid parental leave, the mandated vacation time, the job security, the total Canadian compensation package is often superior over a lifetime.
Especially for middle-class professionals and families who might prioritize that stability over just pure income maximization.
Exactly.
So as a final provocative thought for you to think about, we've seen how complicated all this is: taxes, visas, residency, especially for that remote worker or the student living on the border.
Right.
So consider the ambiguity faced by a U.S. citizen who's studying in Canada. They establish all these physical ties. They rent an apartment. They open a bank account. They get a health card. All things that would normally make them a factual resident of Canada.
Yes, factual residency is based on your physical life, your ties to a place. But then these same individuals might get told by a tax advisor that under the very specific rules of the U.S.-Canada tax treaty, they are deemed non-residents of Canada for tax purposes.
So your daily life says one thing, but the tax law says another.
Exactly. And this ambiguity where you can get conflicting professional advice and your legal reality doesn't match the life you're actually living, it raises this really important question. How complex is the legal and fiscal reality for anyone operating across this border? And how do you reconcile your legal status with the simple human experience of just living somewhere? That uncertainty, that's the final hidden cost.